Every time you rise higher in frequency, you will eventually get to a place where your growth apparently stalls. What is this chain that's holding me back, that's anchoring me to this frequency and not allowing me to rise higher? If a fifth density being were here in the room with me right now, I wouldn't even know it. They could walk right through my physical body without me being physically aware of them at all. At the point of mid-sixth density, the point of the higher self, all polarity is transcended by the soul. As Ra says, polarity comes to an end. It becomes a thing of the past. All perspectives are only relatively true. Even what we teach here is just words pointing to the absolute. You must encounter the absolute truth. You must experience the absolute truth. All words, all belief systems, all perspectives can only at best show you a glimpse of it. So I'm really excited to dive into this topic of spiritual balancing with you guys today in our Q&A because, this is a topic that when we talk about spiritual balancing, I can sort of see or hear many of you struggling to fully grasp what we mean when we talk about this teaching, this practice from the Law of One. And so I want to make this practice as simple as possible for you, as I always do. So let's begin by saying this. Every time you rise higher in frequency, you will eventually get to a place where your growth apparently stalls. Who's experienced that? You rise higher for a while and then the growth appears like it stalls a bit. You're like, what am I bumping up against here? So when we get to that point where our frequency stops rising, we feel like we're at a stalling point. It's as if like there's a chain, tied to us, tied to our feet, holding us down from rising higher. So we got to figure out, what is this chain that's holding me back, that's anchoring me to this frequency and not allowing me to rise higher? And so as we grow higher in frequency, we must grow lighter in energy. We must begin to surrender those lower, heavier energies, right? For example, if a fifth density being were here in the room with me right now, I wouldn't even know it. They could walk right through my physical body without me being physically aware of them at all. Maybe I would be spiritually aware of them and feel the presence of that being, but physically speaking, I wouldn't even know if they walked right in through my body because their frequency is so much higher and denser with lighter, that it can pass right through my slow, heavy third density vehicle that's vibrating at a much slower rate. Their vibration is so fast it just passes right through me. You see that? So they're much lighter in energy, they're much higher in energy. They're not slower and lower in energy, right? So that's how frequency works, is that as we rise higher in energy or frequency, we are getting lighter in energy. So we have to release the heavier energies we're holding on to. So how do we do that is the big question. How do we release the slower, heavier energies we're carrying? And here in 4D University, we teach Ra's practice from the Law of One of spiritual balancing. Spiritual balancing is a component of requalifying because we need to take the juice out of the negative thought pattern before we can requalify it. We talked about this at the retreat. We talk about this in the curriculum. If something still has a lot of potency for you, if it triggers you, if it's really emotionally charged for you, you're not going to be able to requalify it until you take the charge out of it. And so we teach you how to do that, but the main way we do it is through spiritual balancing. That's how we take the juice out of it, is we balance it. So let's talk about spiritual balancing as Ra teaches it. In the Law of One, Ra gives the example of anger when asked about, hey Ra, can you give us a specific example of what this balancing looks like? And Ra says, if you're triggered to anger, what you should do in that moment is not resist the anger, but actually go into the anger and turn it up mentally. Ramp up that perspective as much as possible until you can mentally visualize yourself acting out insane levels of anger. punching holes through the window of a car, running down the highway, screaming in rage and fury, looking like an imbecile. That's where anger, if you just let it go without any restriction, that's where it's going to take you, right? You're going to be a lunatic running down the highway, punching in people's windows and getting arrested. So that's just an example, but you turn up the anger to see the foolishness of it, Ra says. And once you consider the foolishness of where that anger wants to take you, or the folly is the word that Ra uses, which folly is like another word for futility. It is not going to actually benefit you, is what we're getting at. Once you see how that anger isn't actually going to benefit you, then it starts to lose its charge because that perspective has been fully integrated and assimilated. So the first thing we should say about spiritual balancing, if you're taking notes, is that it is a fully contemplative practice. Fully contemplative practice. Meaning this is a mental exercise. That's not to say that you can't or shouldn't act out a perspective physically. I've said this many times on our calls that if you're all alone and you need to move some anger and just let the anger do its thing, then yeah, you could scream into a pillow, punch a pillow, do something to move the energy. That's fine. All we're saying is you really don't want to move the energy in a way that harms somebody else, right? Because that creates more negative karma, and that's what you don't want. That's why we're doing the spiritual balancing exercise, right? Is so we alleviate the karma we're carrying and not generate more negative karma. So if the law of one is the law of do no harm, yes, the law of love everyone as yourself, then we don't want to let our mental exercise be acted out upon somebody else and cause harm. So it's like either act it out mentally so that you don't do harm to anyone, give the ego its day, give the ego what it wants. I want to throw a big freaking fit and tantrum right now. No problem, ego, let's do it. And you imagine it, right? Or if you're all alone, no one's around, throw the fit, who cares? But the point is, you want to go into that perspective until you fully assimilate it and go, oh yeah, it doesn't actually do anything at all to throw a big fit. Doesn't actually help me at all. This anger serves no useful purpose or utility for me. It's not wrong. It's not to be resisted. It's not an enemy. There's nothing wrong with it. It just doesn't have a purpose for me. It's not useful. Does that make sense? So that's how you would balance anger, for example, is you give it its day and then you go, oh yeah, it doesn't really help me at all. Other than moving the energy, right? It's helpful to move the energy, but beyond that, there's no useful utility for anger in physical reality. It doesn't accomplish the outcomes of positivity that I'm looking for. But let's go deeper into this. I want to give you the 3 principles upon which the practice of spiritual balancing can be understood. Because again, what we're trying to do today is understand what spiritual balancing is, the crux of it, right? What are we really trying to accomplish? Because if it's just this like esoteric practice, you're like, okay, I'm told to turn it up in my mind, so let me try it. Okay, here I go. You're not really connecting to the practice. You need to understand the goal of the practice. So here's the 3 principles that will help you do that. The first principle is oneness, or the law of one. The first principle of spiritual balancing is based on the law of one itself, which says that everything is one, all is one. And because all is one, all things are yourself. Everything is you. You are all things. That's the first principle upon which why we want to balance. Why we actually want to balance perspectives, because every perspective is an aspect of myself. So if you have any judgment or resistance to anything in creation, you do not perceive yourself yet. Does that make sense? Because it's all you from different perspectives. So if you hate something, judge it, push it out of your heart, resist it, or crave and chase it and lust for it and have attachments to it, you don't realize it's you yet. Pretty clear. You think it's something other than you that's to be taken or to be resisted. So that's why you need to balance it, because your awareness of self is not complete yet. So your perspective of what you are perceiving needs to be balanced with the awareness of oneness. Until you perceive all things as being one with you, such that there is no judgment towards what you perceive, then you still require spiritual balance. So that's the first principle, the law of one. All things are you, and you have to become aware of that, which is why we need to balance. Second perspective is polarity. And this is the bigger perspective that needs to be probably considered a little bit more. The first one's pretty obvious, I think, but second one is polarity. The fact that all that exists is created from the balanced interchange of two opposite polarities means we have to find equal balance of those polarities within ourselves if we're going to be a balanced being, enjoying a balanced universe. Yes? So in order for anything to exist or to be known, it must have an opposite. This is the law of polarity, isn't it? This is why the Creator made the universe out of two opposite polarities. Because in order for anything to be known, it has to have an opposite to serve as the contrast. So, simplest example would be that in order for the state of love to exist, for love to be known and understood and enjoyed and enriched, enlivened within you, it has to be balanced by the existence of its opposite, which would be fear, right? Hatred, separation, resistance. Love needs to have an opposite to be known. And so remember, this only applies to physical reality, not the Creator itself. And this is a huge point. Polarity, the equality of polarities doesn't mean the Creator has both polarities. Ra is very clear about this in the Law of One. The Creator is without polarity. So fear does not exist in God. But it must seem to exist in the physical universe in order for love to be known by the soul. So when we talk about polarities, I've said this before, but because the polarities are opposites, perfect opposites, that means that one polarity must serve to represent everything that the Creator fundamentally is in its true nature and essence, right? One polarity has to represent what it is. We can't say, let's take what the Creator is, split that in half. This polarity will be half of what the Creator is. This polarity will be the other half of what the Creator is. That doesn't work because both halves are identical, so there's still no polarity. You can't split the Creator in half and then try to have a universe. You have to have one polarity that represents everything the Creator is, and then from that create its opposite of everything the Creator is not. The exact opposite of the Creator's nature. Positive, negative, service to others, service to self, love, unity, or separation, fear. Is and is not. These are the polarities. And so in the physical universe, they balance each other out and give us the ability to know everything, understand everything, experience everything. So from that perspective, positive and negative are equally valid. We're not supposed to cling to the positive and hate and resist the negative. We're supposed to understand the negative, to give it its rightful place and say, hey, the negative was created on purpose by the Creator to give us experience. It's valid. It's supposed to be here. It's not a mistake and it's not wrong. But that's not to say that it doesn't represent everything the Creator isn't, because it does. The negative polarity is everything that God is not. And so this is why Ra calls the negative polarity the path of that which is not. Yes? So this is also why the negative polarity cannot progress past early sixth density, because the negative polarity is ultimately an illusion. The negative polarity is not actually a polarity, it's just the opposite of what God is. And likewise, the positive isn't really a polarity, it's just what God is. But without the opposites, we can't know either one. So until the negative polarity arises in the universe, the positive doesn't arise either. So they need each other, and that is why they're equally valid. So polarity is just a tool. It's just a device for learning of the soul. But eventually, as Ra teaches, at the point of mid-sixth density, the point of the higher self, all polarity is transcended by the soul. As Ra says, polarity comes to an end. It becomes a thing of the past for the mid-6th density soul. The mid-6th density soul, the higher self version of you, looks back at all its past lifetimes and says, oh look, that was back when I believed polarity existed and operated through polarity. Wow, that's so amazing. Now I exist without polarity. So balance takes us to that point, and we will continue to balance from 3rd density through 4th density through 5th density and through the first half of 6th density. So we got a lot of balancing ahead of us, but the balancing becomes very different after 3rd density. Here in 3rd density, we're just balancing the basics. We're doing kindergarten balancing. Stop resisting. Don't judge. Stop hating. Stop fearing. Stop creating these huge imbalances against the universe. See all things as equally valid. See all things as one with yourself. See all perspectives as valid from the relative perspective they come from. So while we are experiencing a polarized physical universe, we must reach perfect balance between each polarity, because perfect balance between polarity represents the state of the creator who has no polarity. So again, polarity is a tool for learning, that's it. And so to come to balance with positive and negative is to understand and accept positive and negative. The 3rd principle is the principle of balance. So we have the law of one, polarity, and balance. The 3rd principle upon which spiritual balancing rests is balance itself, meaning because all is one and all is created from 2 polarities, then all things must exist in a state of equal balanced interchange. Yes, perfect balanced interchange. What is not perfectly balanced is called a blockage in Ra's language. A blockage is really just an imbalance of energy. And so the law of one says that the universe is a system of perfect balance. And so we, being a microcosm of the macrocosm, must come to perfect balance within ourselves as well. And Ra is very clear about this in the law of one. To the fully balanced entity, that is the crystallized being, to the fully balanced and crystallized entity, no situation arises that can trigger a negative emotional response. The only response ever felt to any situation is love and the desire to serve. So that's a pretty high bar, yes? But that is the bar we're shooting for, so let's shoot for it. It's not an unattainable prize. We just have to begin practicing spiritual balancing, and you'll be surprised how fast you can balance your own mental universe. And just by balancing a few things that used to be, triggers that would just eat your lunch, as if anyone said that thing to you, it would always make you upset, or that certain person would always trigger you, and you've worked on balancing enough to where you're like, it's all good. It's all valid. Doesn't affect me. All I want is to be of service and to be kind and loving. You can absolutely arrive at that place through this practice. It just takes some practice. So here it is in the simplest possible definition. Spiritual balancing is the art of holding 2 opposite perspectives at once, equally. To see 2 opposite perspectives as equally valid. That's spiritual balancing. And Ra mentions this in a number of passages in the Law of One. There's one session that I don't know the reference to, but Dawn asks Ra, what would you do in the situation of encountering this kind of catalyst? And Ra says, we would process the catalyst emotionally and mentally. We would then consider its antithesis, its opposite, and we would balance that perspective, and then we would look to be of service. It's like, look at that. It's perfect. It's just like the perfect, simple blueprint of how to meet any catalyst. Whatever triggers you, go to the perspective you find to be the most triggering and live there and contemplate it and become it as if it's your own perspective. Put yourself in the opposite shoes and really, really consider what that perspective is like and why that perspective seems valid from its own reference point. And then once it loses its charge, you've balanced it. Now you can be of service. The only reason someone or something triggers you is because you have not integrated their perspective. Now, this is what we're going to drill into today for the practice. This is a critical element, you guys, of living with inner peace, to understand that everyone is right about what they think and believe from the perspective they're looking from. Aha, yes. You see that? Everyone is right from the perspective that they're looking from. The reason you think they're wrong is because you're looking at their perspective from your perspective. You're looking at their beliefs and thoughts and actions from your perspective. So of course they look wrong and stupid and evil and bad and all the other labels you give them. You have to look at it from their perspective, not yours. It's always going to look wrong from your perspective. You're looking from the opposite vantage point. So you'll never understand them. You'll never come to peace with it, right? You have to develop the ability to consider the perspectives of others as if they are your own perspective. That's spiritual balancing. Let's look at some examples. Left versus right. Politics. Yeah, we just had the debates. Perfect time to use this example. The only reason that radical leftists and far-right conservatives trigger the hell out of each other is because they never make the remotest attempt to actually place themselves in the other person's shoes, right? They never make the slightest attempt to truly understand the other person's perspective. Oh yes, they study their enemy's beliefs and ideology very rigorously, but that's not the same thing as considering their perspective, right? A belief system, an ideology is not the perspective, it's where someone's looking from. The accumulative experience that led them to this belief is the perspective. And so I'm talking about put yourself in their actual perspective, in their actual shoes. Contemplate what it would be like if you had lived their life, if you had become a radical leftist or a far-right conservative. What would drive somebody to be a radical leftist or a far-right conservative? What would put you in their shoes, right? What kind of life would you have to live? And when you contemplate their perspective, like, oh yeah, if I was just always in an echo chamber of angry people screaming about pronouns and 27,000 genders, I could see myself falling into that ideology. Oh yeah, if I was just in an echo chamber of people screaming about Trump as the savior, blah, 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 I could see myself believing that if all my friends believed it. And you know what I mean? Just put yourself in their shoes. And then you're like, okay, I get it. I see why they believe what they believe. Doesn't mean I agree. It just means I understand. Yes? That's it. Vegans and carnivores. How about vegans and carnivores? Both camps think that the other camp is evil, stupid, wrong, all these labels. If you ask a vegan why carnivores don't like veganism, they'll say, well, it's because they're heartless, soulless demons with no compassion in their hearts. They're just flesh-eating demons. That's all they are. But is that how a carnivore thinks of themselves? Imagine asking your carnivore friend, hey, why do you like eating so much meat? I'm just a flesh-eating demon, man. I have no heart. Like, obviously that's not how the carnivore sees themselves. So, and then on the other hand, if you ask a carnivore why vegans don't like eating meat, they'll say, well, because vegans are a bunch of stupid little weaklings who don't understand the basics of nutrition like I do. Is that how the vegan sees themselves? No, that's just an egoic judgment, right? If you ask a vegan friend, hey, why are you a vegan? Are they going to say, because I'm a stupid weakling that doesn't understand the basics of nutrition? No, that's not their perspective. That's the opposite perspective. So if I as a carnivore, let's say, I'm gonna understand a vegan to where I don't get triggered by vegans anymore and I have to be on these keyboard battles on social media all day trying to debate vegans, how do I transcend that distortion in myself and balance it and come to peace? Well, actually pretend you're a vegan. Consider why vegans are vegans from their perspective of, oh, I see why somebody could think that, murdering animals and eating their flesh would be morally wrong. Oh, even the Bible says thou shalt not murder. Oh, that makes sense. Like, maybe I don't agree, but I get why they believe that. Cool. Now it's balanced. Now it doesn't trigger me when I encounter vegans who think that being a carnivore is wrong. or vice versa. Another example, I grew up Christian, right? I lived in those shoes for 23 years, believing all the Christian ideology. And at 23, I reached a point of leaving the religion and not resonating with it anymore. And so now that I teach a lot about, the true gospel of Jesus, the Essene origins of Jesus, I get a lot of triggered Christians coming at me in the comments on Instagram and YouTube. And do you guys think for a moment that any of it triggers me or upsets me? Of course not. I was a Christian for 23 years, or a Paulian, technically. I was a Paulian Christian like them for 23 years, so I fully understand why they think that I'm an evil cult leader, a heretic, a devil worshiper, all the typical names. Like, I've heard these names for years now. That doesn't move me at all. I'm just like, blessings, brother. I understand why you have this fear and hatred in your heart towards me, because I threaten your belief system. I threaten your perspective. So I understand why they have to curse me and call me names, because I thought that way once. I would have thought I was a cult leader and a heretic and an evil person as well when I was 15 years old. It doesn't have a charge for me. I've been in their shoes for so long, it can't trigger me. So you only get triggered by someone's shoes you haven't lived in your mind, you haven't considered. So those are 3 examples, right? 3 easy examples. When you put yourself in the opposite perspective, when you put yourself in that person's shoes or that belief system's shoes, it loses its charge. The more that the 2 opposite perspectives fight against each other, the more they become charged and polarized. And we literally call it that, right? Even in politics, we call it being polarized. Oh, the left has become so polarized. Oh, the right has become so polarized. It's the perfect term. That is what it is. To move away from something is to become polarized. So although we want to become spiritually polarized towards the positive polarity, within our mental universe towards all perspectives, we want to be totally depolarized. Because only neutrality can have genuine love and acceptance. And love is the positive polarity. So in my mental universe, I want to be unpolarized towards every possible perspective, every possible belief, thought, action, everything. I don't want a single movement of the universe to trigger me. That's spiritual balance. That's crystallization. So to balance the polarities within yourself is to spend time in that perspective and explore it and consider it and take it in as if it were your own. It's a mental experiment of sorts. It's a contemplative practice. And another caveat here is that spiritual balancing, considering opposite perspectives and turning them up and really making them feel real, this practice is not about trying to find the one true perspective. Like, this is what everybody invariably does, right? The vegan eventually jumps to the carnivore camp, and the carnivore jumps to the vegan camp, and the left jumps to the right camp, and the right jumps to the left. And they think, oh, whoops, I was in the wrong perspective. All along, it was the other guys that were right. Okay, let me jump to their perspective. And then you burn that one out, and you're like, okay, actually both are wrong and have their flaws. We can skip this period of development by saying, there's no one true perspective. All human perspectives are relative, and so they're all relatively true, and none of them are absolutely true, right? All thoughts, all ideas, all beliefs are not reality. They're mental constructs. So even a belief system, like even what we teach here, right? Even what we teach in 4D University, the law of one, love everyone, be in the heart. Like, these are beautiful concepts, but do not turn this into a religion, right? Don't make this a fundamentalist religion. Well, he's not in his heart, so he's got to... Like, anything can become fundamentalism, right? All perspectives are only relatively true. Even what we teach here is just words pointing to the absolute. You must encounter the absolute truth. You must experience the absolute truth. All words, all belief systems, all perspectives can only at best show you a glimpse of it. And that's why we should consider God from every possible perspective. That's why all religions have something beautiful to teach us about God, because they're all looking at God from a different vantage point, seeing a unique aspect of God, and they all can help us spiritually evolve. But is any one of them absolutely true or the one correct perspective? No, that's not how the universe works. So there is no one true perspective. So get rid of the idea that, oh, I'm afraid of, like, I don't want to contemplate the abuser's life, or I don't want to contemplate a Satanist's perspective. That's scary. What if I think it's true and I become a Satanist? Well, then you clearly don't understand the teaching at all, because there is no one correct perspective. The reason you can freely contemplate all perspectives in the universe is because none of them are true, absolutely. And all of them are true relatively, right? Whatever somebody believes, it feels true to them. Duh. Have you ever thought something you genuinely believed was not true at the same time? Then you wouldn't believe it, right? You believe it because you think it's true. Your experience seems to say it's true. Your experience seems to give evidence to that belief, and so it's true for you. So until you can understand why another belief is true for someone else, you can't have love for them. You can't be balanced within yourself. You have to be triggered. You have to be imbalanced and suffer and suffer and suffer and weaponize the ego more. So again, this practice is not about finding the one true perspective. It's about neutralizing all perspectives. They're all relatively true from their own reference frame, and none of them are absolutely true. Only God alone is the truth, and we cannot put words to what God is. No words can describe absolute truth. So if you really don't like someone, imagine what it's like to live their life. Because guess what? You may hate what they believe and think and how they behave. You may hate them, right? But guess what? If you had lived their entire life just as they have, you would believe and think and act exactly as they do. Sorry. It's just the truth. It hurts the ego to hear it, but you'd be that asshole too if you lived their life. You would. Oh, I promise you, you would. Don't let the ego argue with you on this one. Just accept it, because it's true. If you'd been hurt and abused and conditioned and socialized like your worst enemy has, you'd be just like them. That's why you can't actually understand anyone else in this life, because you would have to completely be somebody to understand them fully. You can only have the unconditional love of the Creator towards others. So, I may not understand you, but I know that you behave the way that you do because you have to. Because you've been hurt, you have pain, you have confusion, you have trauma, and it's forcing you to behave this way. So I forgive you. So spiritual balancing is the key to true forgiveness. Spiritual balancing doesn't mean you agree with every perspective, it means you understand every perspective. I gotta keep saying that because it's so important. Spiritual balancing allows us to see all beings the way God sees them. Let's take one more example just to nail this home. Let's take the worst case scenario of childhood abuse. You're holding this trauma in your body, right, of childhood abuse, because every time you even think about it, it triggers you to so many negative emotions. How could they have done that? What an evil psychopath. I didn't deserve it. On and on and on, all these perspectives you're holding. And so that's because what you haven't done is genuinely put yourself in the shoes of the abuser and consider, why would they do something like that? What could possibly drive somebody to abuse an innocent child? I know it feels like an unthinkable thing, but I promise you, if you were hurt and wounded and traumatized enough, you could abuse a child as well. Any of us could. We're all the same. No one is born evil, right? The ego paints this picture of like, oh, my abuser, well, they came out of the womb with horns on their head, right? They're a demon. Must have hurt their mom in the birth process. They came out of the womb with a pitchfork and twirling their mustache and cackling and red skin and hoofs, and you know what I mean? That's my abuser. They were born evil. But is that true? Ego doesn't want it to not be true, but it isn't. Nobody's born evil. People become evil because they've been treated as such, and they're holding pain and trauma. All pain is a cry for help, right? All pain is all pain has to be offloaded, right? When someone's holding pain in their body from a trauma, from neglect, from abandonment, whatever, they have to offload it. They don't have a choice. They have to, their ego must find a target to launch their pain at. Make sense? So you have to spend time contemplating your abuser's life and perspective of what would make them believe it's okay to abuse a child in whatever way you were abused. In order to protect you, your mind wants to keep this thought at a distance, right? It wants to just project them as evil and never spend a moment actually seeing them as a human like yourself. But that's the key to healing. You want to be healed? You want it to stop hurting? You want to feel peace in your heart when you think about it? You have to put yourself in their shoes and see them as a human being just like you, who is just as capable of that kind of heinous act. If you were hurt that much, if you were raised how they were raised and all the other variables, you could do the same exact thing. And so to use spiritual balancing as a practice to heal your trauma of childhood abuse, you can say, all right, I feel so much resentment towards this person, so much judgment and hatred, but today I accept this person is a human being just like me. They're not an evil demon who was born evil, which means that they were not born as an abuser, they became one through their life experiences. So let me consider what kind of pain, because like you can't know for sure unless you somehow could sit down with your childhood abuser and ask them, you know, what drove you to the point of doing that? And, you know, like nobody gets that chance. Very few people ever get that chance. So you don't need to know the true details. You can just consider all the possibilities and say, what kind of pain or trauma would cause me to abuse children? And you go, well, maybe my abuser was molested as a child. Maybe they were beaten as a child. Maybe they were beaten by their father every week of their life growing up. Maybe they have so much childhood abuse that it's just normal to them. You know, they have to offload their own pain on somebody else. You're like, that's totally possible. And like, as soon as your heart is always open to this. So let's say as soon as your mind is open to the possibility that that person who hurt me might have themselves been a hurting person, you say, I understand. I get it. I don't agree with it. I'm not saying it was right. I understand. That's all I'm saying. And love is understanding. Ra actually calls the fourth density the density of love and understanding. It's not the density of love and approval. No, to understand somebody's beliefs and behaviors does not mean you approve of it. Ego would like you to think it does. Religion would like you to think it does. That's not what it means. It means you get it. Yeah, hurting people hurt people. And so that's where the balance comes from, right? It takes the charge out of it. I've said this before, that trauma is pain you don't understand yet. It's undigested experience. Yeah, it's undigested pain. Trauma only stays with you because you don't understand the nature of it and why it happened. Yes? So once you understand, oh, well, I was abused because that person was abused and they're full of pain and trauma, and so they have to offload it somewhere, and I was the convenient target that day. That's it. It's not personal. It has nothing to do with me. You could swap my childhood body out for 1,000,000 other children's bodies, and the abuser would have done the same thing. It's about the pain offloading itself. That's it. That's how the negative polarity functions. There is no meaning outside of that. A Course in Miracles says this. There is no meaning to fear and to pain. It is insane. That's all it is. So you can just see your abuser as someone who was abused themselves into a position of insanity, where they somehow thought it would be okay or helpful to abuse a child. In a moment of rage, in a moment of lust, in a moment of weakness, whatever it was, it just happened. It's just energy moving energy. It's not personal, has nothing to do with me. And you get it when you consider their perspective. As long as you keep their perspective at a distance, you say, no, I'll never think about them as a person like me. I'll always hate them and see them as an enemy. Okay, you will rot in that prison forever. So until you come to terms with that, you won't see the validity of trying to balance that perspective and to forgive the abuser. Until you want to be free more than you want to have your opinion and be right, then you're going to stay rotting in that prison. So imbalance only hurts you. That's something you have to see. All my imbalances only hurt me. Judging, demonizing, hating people who've hurt you keeps you in bondage. Like, let's be honest, the person who hurt you all those years ago probably doesn't even think about you anymore. But boy, do you think about them. So who's really in bondage here? Of course, they're in bondage to their own karma, but as far as you're concerned, you're just keeping yourself in a prison cell that they're not keeping you in. It always hurts me to hold an imbalance. And this is why only forgiveness can set you free and stop the wheel of karma from spinning. So this is the incredible power of our mind, you guys. We can resolve all paradoxes and all imbalances that hold us back in our mind. We can resolve every imbalance that keeps us from raising our frequency in our mind alone. Isn't that amazing? What a beautiful gift we've been given. We better start using it appropriately. We better start taking advantage of this amazing gift we've been given. Every unbalanced perspective must be balanced by its opposite. That is spiritual balancing. That's the essence of it. Find out what triggers you, consider it, and contemplate that perspective as if it was your own, until you see the relativity of both perspectives. Once both perspectives are equally valid from your point of view, there's no charge, and you are free, you are balanced, you are crystallized in that area. So every imbalance we have is being held in our body somewhere. And if we hold imbalances long enough in the physical body without balancing them, they turn into what? Sickness, disease. Yes, this is the catalyst Ra talks about of cancer and disease, is that it's the body's way of alerting us to an extreme amount of imbalanced energy that needs to be dealt with. We are made in the image and likeness of God, who is the all balance. So you must be balanced as well, or you will always fall into positions of sickness and pain and dis-ease. They're the signs that you need to return to the law of one, return to balance,